This story took place in the late 80s of the last century. Locals still remember the events of those years. In the Midwest, Illinois, an abandoned house on the Jefferson family farm was notorious. The locals avoided it. The oddity began when the first owner of the farm sold it. He had lived here with his family for several years. He was doing well. He made no plans to move. On the contrary, the farmer wanted to expand the business. So the neighbors were surprised when a sign appeared next to his house that said, "For sale." Locals noticed some oddities in his behavior. He had a daughter whom he raised strictly. She was forbidden to play with other children. She was homeschooled. His wife did not socialize with anyone either. The family did not attend the local church. They led a secretive lifestyle. Only the head of the family had outside contact with the world. Mostly, he could be found at Walmart, where he bought groceries and all the necessary things for his family. Here, Mr. Jefferson shared his ideas and his plans with other farmers. Everything seemed to be going well for him, so the family's abrupt move was met with wariness. A young married couple, Mr. and Mrs. Clyde, became the new owners of the house and business. They had 2 children, a girl and an adopted boy. He was her nephew, whom they adopted after his mother died. The first thing that alerted them was the furniture and personal belongings of the previous owners. It seemed that the family had left the house in a hurry. They saw a barn lock on the door of one of the bedrooms. It was the children's room. All the furniture, toys, and even clothes were left there. It seemed as if the previous tenants had just left the house for 5 minutes and would be back soon. The new owners gradually moved in and made the house comfortable. The couple kept some of their belongings. Some items they sold at a garage sale or threw in a landfill. The barn-locked room was given to their nephew Alex. The boy was adopted at the age of 4. His mother, Mrs. Clyde's sister, had died 3 years before. He remembered that day forever. He spent about 5 days next to her body in a locked house. The boy had tried to turn on the gas. Careless handling of the fire caused the place to catch fire instantly. He suffered severe burns to his face, hands, and chest. The death of his mother severely affected the boy's psyche. He became withdrawn and reclusive. Later, he recollected in his psychotherapy sessions that he was trying all these days to warm his mother's body. He covered her with a blanket, but it was not enough, so he decided to light the gas. It was just the 2 of them and his mother. He never saw his father. His mother had to work double shifts as a waitress. There was barely enough money to rent the house and pay some bills. Health insurance was a luxury for them. Social services gave them grocery cards, but that wasn't enough either. Often he was left hungry, waiting for his mother to come in after work and bring him the leftovers of someone else's half-eaten lunch. Alex wasn't friends with anyone. Neighborhood kids teased him about his old shabby clothes. When he moved into his aunt's family, life didn't get any better. Locals recalled that they often saw the boy talking to himself. They heard him complaining about his cousin for bullying him and his foster parents for not punishing her. From how he spoke, it sounded like Alex was conversing with his late mother. "Mommy, she used to come to me at night and disturb my sleep. She was looking for something in the closet." It was an eerie sight. On one side, the boy was pitied. On the other, he was shunned. Life in the house ran its course. Gradually, the family made repairs to the house. They kept most of the previous owner's furniture. Mrs. Clyde later told me that the boy hauled toys from the junkyard that had belonged to the old owners and rearranged the furniture the way it had been when they first moved into the house. Although Alex said he had nothing to do with it. One day, Mrs. Cadade woke up to hear whispers coming from the attic. It was getting boring to her. The boy was always talking to himself. She got up and tiptoed up the stairs. The voice she heard outside the attic door. The woman opened the door and turned on the light, expecting to see Alex. The voices were immediately silenced. No one was there. There was a lot of water and wet footprints on the floor. She called out for the boy, but no one responded. There was no place to hide from her. Then Mrs. Clyde decided to look in his room. Alex was asleep in his bed. Suddenly, she thought she saw something flicker near the closet. It was open. Hangers were lying on the floor. She stepped into the back of the room. It was damp under her feet. Water had spilled all over the room. Goosebumps ran down Mrs. Clyde's skin. She hurried back to her room. The following day, Alex denied that he had made the mess. The boy said a girl came to him wearing a wet dress with water dripping. She was doing something in the closet every night. The woman retold it all to her neighbors. She talked about how tired she was of living with this boy. She adopted him because of the insurance she got after his mother died. This went on for several nights in a row. Soon, Mrs. Clyde found wet footprints near her bedroom front door. The next night, she awoke with the strange feeling that someone was watching her. The woman sensed the presence of someone else in the room. She saw a shadow flicker in the mirror across from her bed. Mrs. Clyde woke her husband, but he said she imagined things. In the morning, she found wet footprints all over the room. That afternoon, they decided to lock Alex in the bedroom. The barn lock on his door from the previous tenants came in handy. Things calmed down for a few days. The boy was locked in his room every night. He asked not to, as he was terrified of her. They didn't understand who the boy was talking about. Alex said he heard a girl whispering from his closet. She was looking for a dress. She was cold. Her clothes were all damp. Mrs. Clyde told this story to the therapist who was seeing the boy. Several days and nights passed. Unusual sounds and strange sensations no longer disturbed the occupants of the house. Sometimes they heard the boy screaming from his room. He called out and begged to be let out. The woman finally calmed down. She decided to herself that it was all Alex's doing. Mrs. Clyde and her husband moved the furniture back into the place. They wondered where the boy got the strength to move the chairs. The table was heavy enough for a child. Mrs. Clyde shared with her friend what was happening in their home. She said that the mystical phenomena that had bothered her, Alex, had done all this time. She thought he was trying to draw attention to himself. Now they slept peacefully. Until one night, the head of the family locked Alex up as usual before he went to bed. The man noticed that the boy had become terrified and nervous lately. About 1 o'clock in the morning, Mrs. Clyde awoke to the sound of music. They were coming from downstairs in the living room. There was an old piano that had been inherited from the former family. A neighbor had told her that it had been the musical instrument of the little mistress of the house. Her father made her play it from morning till night. If she couldn't play, he would pour cold water on it from a hose in the backyard. Many people saw this and were amazed at his cruelty. The tune played faster and faster. The sound intensified. Mrs. Treasure tried to wake her husband but could not. She cautiously left the room and walked toward the stairs. Suddenly, the lid of the piano slammed shut abruptly. The keys let out one last chord. "Alex, is that you?" the woman asked, frightened. She saw a silhouette in the moonlight. At first, she thought it was her daughter, but she couldn't play the piano. Suddenly, there was a noise next to Mrs. Clyde. It sounded like the slapping of bare, damp feet. It was as if someone had run past her. The woman rushed to her room. She never believed in ghosts or anything like that. No one in their family knew how to play musical instruments. Her nephew was locked in his room. They didn't have a cat, so that they could confuse it with a shadow. They only had dogs, but they lived in the yard. She began to think she was going crazy. Mrs. Clyde was afraid of every rustle, every shadow. She began to have trouble sleeping. One evening, the whole family gathered for dinner. Amidst the dishes clinking, they heard children laughing and stomping from above. At first, they didn't pay any attention to it since they were used to Alex's antics. But Alex was with them. The locals were puzzled when they saw a sign next to the Clyde house, "For sale." The family was leaving in a hurry. No one saw them load their belongings. Neighbors hadn't heard about their plans to move soon. Several other families were moving into the house. No one lived here for long. It was sold as quickly as it was bought. In time, word of the farm reached neighboring states. There were fewer and fewer people interested in buying the house. The day came when the last owner abandoned it. Gradually, the place became dilapidated and became a bed and breakfast for tourists and travelers. Everyone said that something strange was happening at night. Some heard children's laughter or whispers. Some saw a flickering shadow in a room with a barn door lock. Sometimes music came from the windows of that house. Perhaps it was the mice that got into the piano. Tourists told a local cafe that they saw something that looked like a girl across the lake. They weren't sure about that. They thought a child might have been lost. They called out for him, but the silhouette seemed to disappear. Years later, a girl's body was found in that lake. It turned out to be Ellie, the little mistress of the abandoned house. Residents speculated what had happened to her. Some said her father had drowned her and her mother. Some said they saw him up north with his new family. The police were investigating. The case still hasn't been solved.